If you're new to the gym and you're confused by all the fitness advice out there, one minute you're told to go heavy and the next minute you're told to start slow. It's confusing and honestly frustrating. At one point, I wouldn't even do bicep curl because I thought they'd make me look bulky. And you start to wonder, what tips actually work? What should I follow? And what should I ignore? I've been there and I've had to deal with the confusion and power my way through it. And that's why in this video, we're going to talk all about the tips I wish someone told me when I started. These aren't generic tips that you've heard 100 times. These are hard-earned lessons from my own personal journey, things that I had to figure out along the way through trial and error. And trust me, there were a lot of errors and a lot of growth. So if you're just starting out, or even if you've been lifting for a while but feel stuck, this is for you. So let's dive in. The first tip I have is that the principle of specificity and needs analysis is extremely important. And I know some of you might be asking, Vanessa, what do you mean by principle of specificity and needs analysis? Well, it's just a way of saying that if you have a particular fitness goal, it means that all the training or all the action you take must necessarily indicate or improve performance in that desired goal. Essentially, it states that for you to improve at a specific sport or physical endeavor, then training must either support or potentiate improved performance in that sport. Now, in the context of hypertrophy, in the context of muscle growth, it means that every training that you make must necessarily signal to your body that you're trying to grow your muscle. A typical example is if you do leg presses, then you directly cause muscle growth in the core, which meets the principle of specificity. However, doing things like very light squats or doing box jumps or doing just random things that don't necessarily meet the criteria or meet the requirements of specificity will take you away from achieving the goal. Therefore, before you begin to train or before you embark on your fitness journey, it's important that you sit down and take a needs analysis and ask yourself what exactly you're training for. Are you training because you want to develop your quads? Are you training because you want to have bigger glutes? Now that you've identified what you're training for, then you need to bring in exercises that will directly support improvement or directly support the growth of your quads or your glutes. One reason why this is very important is that it allows you to avoid distractions. If you know, for example, that my goal is that I want to have bigger glutes, then that would mean that I'm focusing all of my efforts or focusing my attention into performing exercises that would result in bigger glutes. That means I'm avoiding any exercise that's going to violate the principle of specificity. I'm avoiding exercises such as spin classes or such as aerobic classes or just any other exercise that doesn't directly translate to glute growth. And you might even be watching this video and you'll be thinking to yourself that, oh, why is anybody like this is so intuitive? Everybody should know this. Everybody should know what they're working. But you actually be surprised to know that a lot of people skip this step. And what happens is that people follow fitness routines of fitness influencers online, or they follow fitness routines of their friends without necessarily stopping to ask themselves what their goal is. And one interesting thing about fitness is that you can be doing the same split as someone else, but your results will actually be different. That's because fitness is essentially based on genetics. And so you need to take into account your own genetics and fashion a workout that works for you. The second tip that I have that is often skipped over, even though people know this, is the fact that muscles grow only when they're forced to. Like, I know you've probably heard this a million times, and that's because it's true. But even though most people know this, most people skip over this, especially because when you're in the moment, when you're doing an exercise or so, there are a million things running through your mind, and you're tired, and your body's telling you to drop the weight. At that very point where your body is telling you to drop the weight or to drop the exercise, that's actually the point where you shouldn't, because that's when muscle growth occurs. So for most people, especially for ladies, we're going to go into the gym and we're going to look for the lightest dumbbell and try to do a squat with the lightest dumbbell or try to do a bicep curl with the lightest dumbbell. You are not signaling to your body or you're not signaling to your muscles that you want them to grow. If you actually want your muscles to grow, you need to break them down. I know it sounds very horrific, like, okay, why am I putting pain? But literally, pain is gain. You need to put yourself through that pain and literally break down your muscles so that they can grow. Now, what causes muscle growth? I know, like, on the surface, we're always saying muscle growth, but what actually causes muscle growth? Muscle grows when there's optimal micro tearing, which the body then has to repair, which leads to adapting the muscle to better handle the stimulus that caused the damage. And this process is simply the process of hypertrophy. This is what is scientifically referred to as hypertrophy. Now, if a workout, if a particular exercise causes very few micro tears in the fiber, then little muscle growth will occur because the body figures it doesn't need to grow to deal with such a minor stimulus. But if a workout causes a lot of tears in the fiber, then the body will fail to fully repair the muscles and muscle growth will be stunted. However, remember the word here is optimal. If a workout causes optimal stress, or if a workout causes optimal tear in the fibers, then it signals appropriately, or it signals accordingly to the muscles that it needs to repair and grow. However, this is very dependent on one thing, which is nutrition, and which also takes me to my third tip, which is the fact that if you can measure it, then you don't know it. Something that I always hear at work is that if you don't know the numbers, then you don't actually have a full picture of it. Tracking your nutrition and also tracking your workouts in a log is the key to success. I'm also aware that in current times, a lot of people are choosing to do intuitive eating. And personally, I do not count my calories anymore. But that's because when I was first starting, I had to count my calories. Because if I started, how would I know what a pound of chicken is? Or how would I know what a kilogram of yogurt actually is? It's because you have counted your calories at the beginning. That's when you have a base idea of what you're actually doing. But if you don't have anything to reference again, if you don't have any knowledge in that regard, then I'm sorry, but you might actually be missing the point. Especially if you're on a weight loss diet where you need to be sort of exact, even though no matter how you try, you wouldn't be exact, but it helps you at least to stay on the course, at least to stay on the line and know, have an idea, have an estimation of what exactly or how many calories you're consuming. And even as we're tracking our nutrition, it's also important that you're tracking your workouts. A lot of people miss this step. People just come into the gym and rely on their brain to remember or to remind them how many kg they went the last time or how many pounds they lifted the last time. I think that this is a suboptimal approach because we're living in an age where there's technology available to you, or even if there's no technology available to you, you have a notebook, you have your notepad. Just find a way to actually take track and measure what you're actually lifting. Personally, I use the Heavy app, and the reason I use the Heavy app is because I like to see my workouts represented in front of me. And because I'm also vain, I like to get some affirmation and validation when I've hit a new PR, which is why I would prefer to go the digital route. But if you're someone who like it's none of your business, you don't need all of that, then you can just use the notes app in your phone or use a notebook to write down your workouts. But you should actually be tracking your workouts because that's a way to remind yourself that you need to progressively overload. Because when the picture is right in front of you, when you're seeing your workout log right in front of you, and you see that in January you were lifting 60 kg, and somehow in March you're still lifting 60 kg, it's visually represented to you and you can see it in print. You can know that, okay, something is not right. By this time, I'm supposed to have increased either to 80 kg or to 100 kg or something, all things being equal. So it's a way to actually keep track or to keep yourself in check. So if you have not been tracking your workouts today, I hope that you really turn a new leaf and start to track your workout. Then the next step I have is probably the most important tip that you need to know, not just in fitness, not just like in training or workouts, but in life generally, which is that you need to get educated, you need to get informed, you need to constantly be consuming information. And I know that there's a thin line between actually consuming useless and useful information on the internet because there's just a lot of information. There's like information overload out here. But it is your responsibility to actually be intentional about the media and the sources that you consume those information for. So that's one part. However, the major part that I'm really focusing on is that every fitness choice or every choice that you have in life is either determined either by your knowledge or your lack of knowledge. And progress in your fitness goals will really be determined by the amount or the quality of information that you have. So let's take, for instance, that you're someone, you've done a needs analysis, and one of your needs or one of your urgent needs is that you need to drop 10 kg. Okay, that's very good. You've identified what you need to do. Now, what are the next steps? Are you going to go the route of weight training, or are you going to go through the route of cardio? And that's where knowledge becomes important. Point here is that you need to be a master of yourself, and you need to inform yourself if you don't have enough information. So, from our last example, you're someone who you've identified that your goal is weight loss. The next question would be, how will I make sure that my diet supports my goal? And this is where knowledge, this is where information of both macros and information about your system comes in. There is a lot of confusing information out there on the internet. One part is telling you that intermittent fasting is the way to go. Another part is telling you that you need to run 10 miles every day. Another one is telling you that you need to weight train 6 days a week. All of this information or all of these strategies can actually be useful to different people, but not all the advice online is actually tailored to you, which is why you need to understand your body. And to be honest, this is something that I've had to go through different seasons. For instance, when I first started my cotton journey, I was so abhorrent of cardio. Like, you could never get me to do cardio. I hated cardio. And I just thought that weightlifting was everything, because you know how the research tells you that if you're lifting weights, your body has muscles and therefore you're also burning calories even while you're rested. So I thought, okay, the optimal thing was for me to actually increase the amount of times that I lift weights. And I still totally ignored cardio. I was never doing any form of cardio. When people talk about their steps, I'm like, you guys are joking. I'm going to dust you all because I'm in the gym 6 days a week and I'm lifting. And that did not really work for me. I tried this approach for like 2 to 3 months and I really wasn't seeing any difference. That's when I decided to give cardio a try. And so I decided to incorporate walking every day and actually getting my steps every day. And that simple action actually skyrocketed my progress. Therefore, now I have the information that a combination of cardio and weightlifting is what is optimal for me. So you need to try different things. Take inventory of what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And remember that I said earlier that you need to track. And it's by tracking, combining numbers, that's when you're actually going to be able to get quality information. And one thing that is very ironical that I'm talking about tracking here is that I'm not actually a numbers girl. I don't like numbers. Like, I've never been a numbers girl, but something about me embracing fitness has just helped me to understand that like numbers are actually essential. Like, you can see I'm wearing my Apple Watch, and that's because I need to track my steps. I need to, at the end of every day, I need to log into the app and see how many steps I've done. At the end of the day, I need to go on the scale and see how much I'm weighing. At the end of the day, I need to check my phone and see how many hours of sleep I've gotten. At the end of the day, I need to look at the food scale and see what I'm eating. It's by looking at these numbers, that's the only way you'll be able to make incremental progress. So this is my message to everyone, to actually embrace numbers. So the next tip that I have is for you to set systems, not goals. The inspiration from this was from a book that I read, which is called Habits by this author. So I usually describe myself as a disciplined person. However, when I read this book, it made me understand that you should rely less on your discipline and actually rely less on habits that you've built. And how are habits built? Habits are basically consistent actions that you take every day. The summation of that habit, or the summation of those little actions that you take every day, is actually what will determine if you reach your goal or if you don't hit it. So for instance, let's say that you've set a goal, that your goal is you want to hit 60 kg by the end of December. Your responsibility is to ask yourself every single day, what actions or what habits can I incorporate to help me reach that goal? It could be deciding that you're always going to have your running shoes by the door, or it could be laying out your running clothes before you go to bed in the night. So that way, when you wake up in the morning, you actually reduce the temptation to go back to bed. It could be deciding that every Sunday by 2 p.m., I'm going to go to the grocery store and I'm going to get my groceries for for the week. It could be deciding that I'm going to have my fitness clothes at the front of my wardrobe. That way, I remind myself constantly that I'm now an active person. One other way to set systems is for you to rely less on your willpower and actually reduce the amount of decisions that your brain has to take before you carry out an action. If you're someone who you are doing home workouts, what you can do is to lay out your yoga mat by a section of your room, so that way when you wake up you go straight to the mat without having to decide, okay, am I going to go to the mat, or which corner of the house should I go to? Because all of those decisions, all of those tiny decisions that we have to make before we take an action can actually hinder us carrying out that action. Therefore, incorporate small tiny actions every day, and that is what will actually compound and lead you to achieving your fitness goal. And those were the 5 major tips that I wish someone told me when I was starting, and that will also help your fitness journey. Thank you so much guys for watching, and make sure you click on this video here because YouTube thinks you're going to like this video, and I'll see you guys in that one.